and welcome to State of the Economy, a show that connects you with key policymakers and thinkers. Today we have with us Dr. Abhijit Sen, Member Planning Commission, who is also a very well-known agriculture economist and has has deeply studied India's food economy, and we will today discuss with him a whole lot of issues relating to our food economy, the complexities, our agriculture production, the food inflation, and what have you. Welcome to our show, Dr. Abhijit Sen. I will open with a broad framing question as to how do you think our political economy today is poised to resolve the key issue of balancing the interests of the farmers with that of consumers?
Let's take this thing about between farmers and consumers. I mean that basic balancing between the two. Now, obviously, there's nothing new in this. I mean, this is something that is, I forget, it's either the number one or the number two terms of reference of the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices since 1965. So, I mean, we are talking about an old problem, not a new one.
Has it got accentuated in recent years?
I'm not sure that it's got accentuated in recent years. I think there have been situations like this in the past. But certainly, there are problems today. And I think what people often don't realize is the problem usually becomes a very difficult one when, for example, oil prices start going up. Okay, I mean,
that's a new problem. Yeah, oil prices going
well,
up.
Well, it's happened in the mid-70s as well, and we had exactly the similar type of problem then as well. Essentially, what happens then is that a lot of things start kicking in. A lot of farm prices are related. I mean, farm costs are related
to oil.
Mm-hmm. And either government has to actually keep subsidizing all of that, or it starts pushing that into higher farm costs, in which case higher farm prices also would have to be given for the farmer. And consumers in the meantime already hit by the oil prices on the fuel side. What is new, I think, this time around, in some sense, is that we are also seeing the effects of relatively high growth.
Okay.
We've had problems of a supply-demand mismatch in the past, but usually in the past, the supply-demand mismatch has been not because demand is growing very sharply, but because supply has not grown. I'm talking about agricultural growth at about 3.5%. But obviously, given what the prices are doing, it is clear that
we need to produce more.
That the demand growth is even sharper. And that's obviously related to the fact that even this 7% this year GDP growth rate, which is down from 9% for a number of years since between 2004 and 2008, those are growth rates we've never attained in the past before. And that must be associated with higher demand growth.
Higher demand growth.
And there are certain problems which come up when you're trying to run too fast.
So you're clearly suggesting that we need to further enhance supply, right? And so in that context, would you justify the recent hike in the minimum support price of paddy, 16% increase recommended by CACP?
If you take the case of paddy particularly, I think, frankly, I think it's too much. It's too much for a number of reasons. First of all, this year, we will probably end up with a procurement of 38 million tons of rice, not paddy. And our rice stocks and our wheat stocks are now very, very large.
So there's not such a big supply issue there.
So there is not a supply issue in rice and wheat. And more importantly, with the sort of MSP which has been recommended by the CSCP, translated into rice, that would mean a rice equivalent of that MSP, which is either equal to or somewhat above what Indian non-basmati rice is currently fetching in export markets.
Oh, it's in
So
export
basically, we'll have all of these huge stocks,
Stocks.
and we will not even have the export outlet for them.
Okay. So, recently the chairman of CACB wrote an article for my newspaper, which is Financial Express, where he gave comparable minimum support price figures for some of the Asian economies, which were all in the region of average about $270 to $300 per ton. And he claimed that the MSP that he has recommended or CACB has recommended in dollar terms is way below that. It's about $240. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I've not actually seen that article, but it is true that, for example, the Thais, starting last year, went into an MSP business, which is one of the reasons why rice prices are somewhat higher now than they were a little while back. And the MSP that they fixed was roughly around $400 for rice. Now, don't forget that $400 for rice works out to about a third of that less. So that would be about $250 or $260 for paddy.
Paddy.
Okay, you require 1.5 kilos of paddy to make 1 kilo of rice.
Right.
What has been recommended by CSCP is in the region of about 1350, okay, for paddy. And 1350 for paddy is
Per quintal, 1350 per
per
quintal.
quintal. And that divided by 50, is about 270.
Which according to you is
Which is not very different.
yeah, it's okay. So you don't okay. So your calculation shows that it's not very different. We are not much lower than the Asian economies. We'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and keep watching Rajya Sabha television. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Abhijit Sen, Member Planning Commission. Dr. Sen, we were discussing the food economy, and you were telling me about this big imbalance in the way we are running our food economy. Like you cited the example of paddy, food grains, of which we have abundant supply, and on the other hand, there are other items of daily consumption like edible oil, which we import 50% of our requirement. Similarly, on pulses also we are pretty much in short supply. Now, how did these imbalances, number one, come up all these in these years, and how do we resolve these imbalances?
Well, I think pulses and oil seeds are rather different. As far as pulses are concerned, there's one very simple fact. We are people who eat a lot of pulses. There are very few other countries which eat as much pulses.
It's a major source of protein for vegetarians.
And the sort of pulses that we eat are not produced too many places in the world. Pulses is something that ultimately we have to do on our own, and we have failed. I mean, our pulse production remained at around 15 million tons for about 20-25 years. It's only last year that we've gone up to 18 million tons.
Because of some pilot projects.
It's not just pilot projects. I think we are concentrating on pulses in a way that we hadn't before.
But that's a huge neglect for 15 years, stagnant.
It's not just 15, it's 25 years. The problem is that we've not really had a technological breakthrough in pulses of the type we have had in other crops.
Other crops, okay.
However, there is an effort now on, and in the last 2 years, it seems to be paying off. How much it will continue, we'll have to wait and see. Edible oils is a different story altogether, because this is something that everyone requires, and there's a
50% of our consumption is
very large thing. And today, our consumption is about half of it is met through imports. And the way it has happened is because we have, over the years, essentially there was a period under Rajiv Gandhi when there was a technology mission on oils, which got output going quite sharply. And at the end of that technology mission in the mid-90s, we were almost self-sufficient. But that technology mission had relied very much on giving high prices. And as a result, our prices were much higher than the rest of the world.
So you think that might have been a mistake?
Well, it may or may not have been a mistake. We are just importing the thing almost duty-free. Now, I think this is one area where there is a case for consumers to pay somewhat more for edible oils, and you can actually then increase the duty, and then you can actually have a higher price which a farmer gets.
So this is one area where the terms of trade are clearly against the farmers, right?
Yes, but edible oils is also more complicated. See, I think we get it wrong here, not just on this one. Take something like soybean, which is the largest and the fastest growing oil seed that we produce. Even more than oil, the returns of soybean are related to soybean meal rather than soybean oil. And in the case of soybean meal, we are exporting it without any duty. Okay, what that does is that it pushes up the price of animal feed.
So there's a knock-on effect.
Where our inflation is most is in fact in milk and animal products. And in the oil economy, what we've ended up doing is we've got farmers to be pushed on the oil side, and we are giving a rather large cost on the meal side. And I think there's a considerable area of rethinking. I think we should have some duty on oils and some export duty on meals. Some import duty on oils and some export duty on meals.
Dr. Sen, I'm now coming back to the bigger question. Like you clearly pointed out the problem in edible oil, but there is a general sense that across the board, we have actually failed to manage our food economy in the sense that we have failed to give farmers the right price signals, and we fail to in many ways also protect the farmers from massive subsidies which are being given by governments outside other countries with whom India competes in agriculture trade. So where are we today? So we need to up production. Nobody questions that. We need to up production. We have to give. Is the solution that we give more minimum support prices in a range of other products, including edible oil, to ramp up domestic production and protect ourselves and enhance our food security?
Yes, I think this is an area which has been, again, not new, a matter of a discussion within government, and I think a lot of has been written academically about why not extend MSP much more into other things. Now, one big issue, of course, there is that if you're going to have very effective MSP operations of the type of rice and wheat, then it's going to cost money.
Dr. Sen, we'll take a small break and we'll come back to the subsidy issue. Please don't go away and keep watching Rajya Sabha television. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a very interesting conversation with Dr. Abhijit Sen on India's food economy. Dr. Sen, we were on the issue of subsidies. I think you hit the nail on the head. If you want to enhance food production substantially to meet the needs of the population, growing needs of the population, and ensure our food security, there is no other option today than to give more subsidy to farmers to produce more. To me, it's a puzzle that historically, if you see the way the West has evolved, as Western economies industrialized and progressed, they had to subsidize agriculture more and more because there are fewer people who stayed back to do agriculture. Do you think that India will also necessarily follow that trajectory? Is that the only way that we can escape some of the problems of the political economy today, which is production not good enough, at the same time consumers are unhappy because inflation is going up, farmers are also unhappy. So if you want to please both farmers and consumers, you can't escape higher subsidies. Is that what you're saying?
To some extent, but let's not get too carried away by it. I mean, the point is that we still have about half our population in agriculture. Okay, this is a very different situation from the West. So that, it's, and therefore, you can't subsidize half of the population, whereas the US can for 2% of its farmers.
But doesn't food security bill seek to do that?
No, not quite. I mean, we are not talking about an income subsidy, which is what, subsidizing the farmer.
There's one farmer and there's
the consumer. Yeah. There is, of course, the domestic fiscal aspect. But I think the real issue here is that we have subsidies of a lot of varieties. We have subsidies on fertilizer, we have cheap power, we have cheap irrigation, we've got, we've got a lot of things.
Water subsidies.
A lot of things are subsidized through the agriculture ministry and things.
So if you aggregate all that, it's...
The issue is, I think, are we subsidizing the right thing at the right places? And I think taking this entire subsidy thing and actually having a better type of mechanism.
So you rationalize the subsidies.
I think, for example, even within fertilizer, for example, at the moment, we are in a situation which I consider to be ridiculous. And that is that the main fertilizer, urea, is still under control, and all other fertilizers have been decontrolled, which means that we are back in a situation where people are switching from phosphate and potash and other nutrients onto urea and creating imbalances for the soil.
A new kind of distortion.
A distortion which happened in the 90s. And in fact, this time around, what we had said is we are going to have balanced soil nutrition. And we're doing anything but that simply because the urea lobby is too strong. And this is not just the only one. I think there are a lot of areas in which we could increase the effective amount paid by government. Part of it is on MSP, part of it is on direct investment. And there are lots of places where you can actually cut the subsidies and in fact pay for most of the additional things there. These require decisions which will be treading on people's toes. And as far as till now, I think those toes have proved to be more valuable than logic.
So that's the way our political economy works. For instance, I'll give you one example, which is oft repeated. Why should Punjab be the biggest producer of rice in this country when there are many other areas where higher water tables with which should be producing more rice? Do you subscribe to that? I mean, why is Punjab producing? Do you subscribe to this? The theory that rice cultivation should shift from Punjab gradually to states like West Bengal, Bihar, etc. More of it.
No, obviously. I think this has been clear for a long time that there should be more production in the east, in the lower Gangetic Valley. And thankfully, a little bit of it has begun in the last 2 or 3 years.
You're saying the shift has already begun, right?
To some extent. Not a great deal, but I think one shouldn't overlook the fact that the reason Punjab is producing so much rice, whereas it didn't produce any rice in the 60s, is because when the new technology came around, the Punjabis proved the best guys at taking it up and producing with it, and they were efficient at it.
Yeah, they were efficient.
However, it is true that they've now got a crop which is proving to be disastrous for its groundwater. They've got a crop which is leading to all sorts of other problems for the Punjab economy. But it is a crop where there is no substitute in terms of the income that a farmer gets from 1 hectare of rice. There is no other crop substitute which you could replace that rice and get a better income. Until that happens, Punjab will continue to grow rice. Yes, I think Punjab is a very good case where we could, for example, get them to grow maize again in Kharif, which is something which they used to grow in the 1960s in Kharif. But in order to do that, we would need to have an equally efficient MSP system that the Punjab farmer has gotten used to.
So, is this a case, I mean, you're an economist, is this a case of efficient operations leading to a problem eventually? I mean, efficient agriculturists who, without realizing, they lead their basic agriculture economics into a problem. Like you said, Punjab should not be producing rice, or Maharashtra should not be producing that much of sugar.
No, true. I mean, the point is that I think agriculture is probably the single most important area which really mines natural resources. And often the efficiency is related to how much you can mine. Okay, this is true of the Green Revolution technology, it's true of sugarcane, it's true of a number of other things. And
so you have to keep taking correctives.
Unfortunately, therefore, it also means that if you are very efficient at mining, you are going to run into risks of, you are going to
depleting
your soil or your water.
And Doctor, now coming to the food security bill, on which also you did considerable work, do you feel that the food security bill focuses too much on food grains and really doesn't address the bigger issue of nutrition, say across the board nutrition? And that's one question. The other is, do you think we have enough post-harvest infrastructure to deliver this, as Swaminathan has recently said somewhere?
Yes, our post-harvesting infrastructure can do with a huge amount of expansion and a considerable
But that is critical to distribution, right?
Of modernization. But having said that, I won't say it's critical to the Food Security Act.
Because you have to take it to the people,
No. For the last several years, we have been procuring about 50 million tons, then it went up to 55, then it went up to 65, then last year it went up to about, this year is probably going to go up to about 72. Last year it was almost 67 or something. Now, these are dimensions well beyond what the Food Security Act is talking about. They are talking about a total demand of 56 million tons or something. Okay. I would have thought that the Act would have been better if it had balanced the subsidies that it requires, not entirely on rice and wheat, but across
meal, soya,
some other things. I think that would have been better. It would have allowed what we were talking about a little while ago, more MSP operations in those crops.
Those crops, exactly. That's what I was coming to.
It would have done too.
Yeah.
But what it would have gone against is an election promise. And that election promise was 2 rupees rice and 2 rupees wheat and 3 rupees rice. That is, if you could actually have had the rice and wheat price not at 2 and 3, but say 7, 8, 9, 10, you could have actually started.
Politicians can go back to their constituency and say, okay, we said this, but now we've modified it a bit in your interest, and explain to them. Basically, communicate with people that you will get, maybe you'll get soya, you'll get other protein,
true. Based, but again, coming back to something you said earlier, if that were to happen, we would also have to actually realize that we would need a little bit less rice and less wheat into our PDS.
So
Therefore,
to reduce
so the MSP for that would have to be somewhat lower.
again you're trading on
and
toes.
and the MSP for the other crops would have to be there. So you're essentially what you're doing is you're saying that we have to rebalance, but rebalancing would
trading
hurt
on some toes.
and at the cost of others.
Thanks, Dr. Sen. That is the nature of our political economy. Good to discuss these issues with you. And that's all we have in this episode of State of the Economy. We will be back again with another edition soon. Thank you. Goodbye.